Hello and welcome to The Space Above Us. Episode 129, Interview with Astronaut Dan Tani. Last time, we took an important step on the road to a robust commercial spaceflight industry and introduced SpaceHab to the stage. This privately developed competitor to Space Lab turned out to be a pretty snazzy addition to the Space Shuttle orbiter. The crew got more room for experiments and storage, companies and universities got more opportunities to fly experiments, and SpaceHab got to pick up a little profit. We also grabbed the European science satellite Eureka, went for a quick walk outside, and pondered the Twinkie-like qualities of the Space Shuttle orbiter. The next flight after STS-57 was STS-51, but as I mentioned last time, rather than diving right in, I've got something a little special.
I'm Dan Tani. I was a NASA astronaut. I flew on STS-108 Endeavour. Then I flew on STS-120 Discovery. That took me to the space station where I became a crew member on Expedition 16 on the ISS. And I flew home on STS-122 Atlantis.
That's right. I interviewed an astronaut. In November of 2019, I was visiting the Kennedy Space Center and made sure to do one of my favorite KSC activities, the Dine with an Astronaut Lunch. For those who have not experienced it for themselves, this is basically just what it sounds like. For a few extra bucks, you get a nice lunch while a NASA astronaut talks about what it's like to fly in space. They walk around, say hi, do a question and answer session, and at the end, you can get a handshake and a photo. It's actually a really cool thing that the visitor complex does, and it's how I've met John Blaha, Jerry Ross, Wendy Lawrence, and on this trip, Dan Tani. Of course, me being me, I used my few seconds with an astronaut to plug my podcast, and Dan actually started listening. This is just one of many reasons why Dan is a pretty cool dude. Dan hasn't entered the narrative of the podcast yet. That'll come in 1996. But before becoming an astronaut, he worked at Orbital Sciences on the Transfer Orbit Stage, or TOS, a competitor to the inertial upper stage that we're already familiar with. TOS only flew on the shuttle once, and you guessed it, it was on STS-51. Dan graciously reached out and offered to tell me a bit about TOS and about the dramatic technical glitch it encountered at the moment that it was deployed. You may have noticed that this is a pretty lengthy episode. That's because in addition to discussing STS-51, we also covered a bunch of other questions that I was wondering about. When arriving at the launch pad, how do astronauts get from the van to the shuttle? Why did crew members always talk about how uncomfortable it was on the pad? How do various theme park rides compare to the real launch experience? And a whole bunch more questions like that. One quick note before we get into it. It would probably be best not even mention this, but this is the sort of thing that I would wonder about if I were a listener. You may hear the quality of the audio drop a few times. That's just caused by me switching to a backup recording when the video call dropped out for a moment. So there you go, bonus technical peek behind the curtain. Oh, and since this is an audio-only medium and I carelessly introduced two images into the conversation, I'll just have to ask you to remember the two images that we discussed. When we talk about someone potentially having gone through re-entry while standing on the flight deck, that was Story Musgrave. And I've actually heard Story himself talk about this, so more on that in another episode. And when we were talking about timers all over the shuttle, we're talking about those little white kitchen timers with black buttons that are visible in so many space shuttle photos. I'll include a photo in the announcement tweet for this episode. Okay, enough preamble. Let's meet Dan.
JP, good to see you. Good to see you again.
Yeah, man. How you doing?
Well, thank you.
Yeah, so I guess what the main topic for today would be, you mentioned that you had some involvement with STS-51 before you were even selected as an astronaut and, knew some stories about the perigee kick motor, I guess?
Yeah, so one of my first job out of grad school was with a company called Orbital Sciences. They used to be Orbital Sciences, then they became Orbital ATK, and then Northrop Grumman. But anyway, in the old days of Orbital Sciences, it's sort of lost probably in the history books, but the way they were founded was three guys from Harvard Business School wrote a paper about the idea of commercializing space. And the product that they envisioned was a commercial competitor to the IUS. The IUS is a kick stage that goes from low Earth orbit out to some other orbit. And but it was Air Force developed, or it's used for government and military satellites.
Sure.
And so the idea was these three guys thought they might be able to make a less expensive, yet robust and human rated kick stage commercially, and that was called the transfer orbit stage. So I came on board early on in Orbital's lifetime and started working on the transfer orbit stage, or the TOS. And the way it was, the structure back then was that Orbital was the prime contractor to NASA. However, Martin Marietta was our subcontractor, and they did all the build of the hardware and generally the software. And so we were sort of the middleman. But one of the things that we retained at Orbital was mission operations. And so I got lucky enough to be the person to be pegged for doing the payload operations for the transfer orbit stage. And so I got to put a team together and build a little POC, a payload operation control center, and down at KSC, and write the procedures that would work hand in hand with the astronaut procedures and the JSC procedures to launch or deploy the transfer orbit stage out of the shuttle. And so it was a great job as a young engineer. It was a fantastic opportunity to really work with NASA tightly. I got to know the crew of STS-51 very well. And fast forward 20-something years, I got to fly with three of them in space at the same time. And it was just fantastic. What a kind of a coincidence in my career. But yeah, so I'm intimately involved with the transfer orbit stage and its deployment from the Space Shuttle Discovery. And there were it's actually talked about a lot in terms of lessons learned for engineering. It was a near catastrophic event, deploying this upper stage and the ACTS, Advanced Communication Technology Satellite, out of the payload bay. And I've sat in some seminars where they actually talk about this, and it's the story gets a little convoluted, like most stories do. So I thought I could try to be a reference for you and give you, from what I remember, as the best firsthand knowledge of the incident.
Sure. So I guess could you start off by maybe contrasting it? Like, how is it different from the IUS? Because I'm a little bit familiar with that since it was pretty popular in the early shuttle days.
It was designed to be a much simpler stage, right? So, and I can't remember why what makes the IUS different than the TOS. Really, that's way back in my.
I would imagine it's still solid propellant on this, and still a two-stage. So I guess rather than contrasting it to IUS, why don't you tell me a little bit about what made TOS?
Sure. You buy a big solid rocket motor, and you want that because it's probably the safest, and it has you don't have to worry about topping up fuel and stuff like that. And then you put on top of it a smart ring of all the avionics and the reaction control system. So it's a hydrazine reaction control system, and so that provides the steering. The kick motor itself has a gimbal nozzle, so it can do a lot of the pitch and the yaw, but then roll control, and also augmenting the control from the motors, a reaction control system, and then an integral part of the whole flight system is what's called the GSE, the FSE, the Flight Support System, and it's what holds this whole thing into the shuttle payload bay. And so
that's like the main interface to the orbiter. Right.
It's the structural interface to the orbiter. And so, of course, when you're launching and all the dynamic aspects of flight, you want that thing solidly in the payload bay. And then when you're ready, then you use some actuators and you elevate the stack, the TOS and the ACT spacecraft. So it's sort of angling out of the payload bay at about a 45-degree angle. And then the crew will press a button, and then you have to separate the TOS ACTs from the stuff that stays in the shuttle payload bay. Now that what has to be initially a solid connection, that has to then sever so that it's now free to separate is the whole. It's the problem that we encountered on the flight, because that's a very complicated system. Something that has to have structural integrity for passively has to have structural integrity, but then you have to do something, and then it separates. Now, almost every rocket that we launch has that, where stuff stages off and comes off. And so these mechanisms are very complicated. They're high energy, and but the reliability has to be, of course, 100%.
It's kind of like, reminds me of the always never problem. It has to always hold on real tight when they, during ascent, and never hold on when they want to get rid of it.
That's exactly right. And many problems in spaceflight, and probably aviation also, has to do with things that don't perfectly separate when they were supposed to, or separate prematurely. So you're exactly right. It's always and never. Okay,
so ascent goes. They go up there, open the payload bay doors, got the thing tilted back, and I guess what happens there?
So the X spacecraft, the way the timeline was put together for STS-51, this is going to be a day one deploy. So it's a pretty active day for the crew. They get up there. My memory is that it's on orbit 7 that they are intending to deploy. And so you're right. They get up, payload bay doors open. They've got to reconfigure the cabin, all that stuff. But now they're straight into the deploy checklist. And we, of course, do some electrical checkouts, and we can see it from the ground. We agree that, yes, the spacecraft is ready and the TOS is ready. And then they, through switches in the cabin, they activate these actuators that now tilt up. And meanwhile, we have to do a bunch of calculations, because the orbiter can tell us where it thinks it is, but we also want to know where we are in inertial space relative to the sun, because we're going to burn. We're going to take the X spacecraft to geosynchronous orbit. So there's some inertial measurement calculations that have to be run, and then we have a deploy moment that we are targeting. And for the first deploy attempt, let's see, I think we activated something on the X spacecraft, and all of a sudden we could not hear the crew. Crew couldn't hear us. We could hear the crew, but the crew couldn't hear us. And so we're on the ground giving the go, saying, we see the data, but they never heard us. And so they waved off the deploy, because that's the rule. And then they did a deconfiguration, and then all of a sudden we could talk again. And we found out that we had a frequency mismatch. The S-band frequency from the shuttle was being interfered with by the S-band frequency of the spacecraft. And so that was unanticipated. Now, the flight rule that we were up against was that, since this is the end of a long day, if we didn't deploy on Rev 1, we were going to have to put the whole thing back down into the bay and wait the next day. But we did a real-time call and a real-time waiver, so that we were able to go for a deploy on the very next Rev. I think it was Rev 8 from memory.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's a long day. It's a long day for the crew, but they were willing to do that. And so on the new frequency, on the backup frequency on the shuttle, no frequency clash. And so it was a nominal deploy, gave them the go. They ran the checklist perfectly, pressed the button, and the TOS and AX were separated, and we could hear I don't think we had real-time video downlink, but we could hear the crew talk about the separation, and it was they were excited, and then in fact they pointed the kick motor. I think it burns 40 minutes after deployment, and they were able to take the arm and point the camera at the TOS, and we were able to see the bright ignition of the kick motor, and
wow.
Boy, we were happy. We were ecstatic, and went home that night and closed our deploy checklist, and we thought life was really good. So then we overnight. This is in the early shuttle days. You didn't have a lot of KU band coverage, and so they would literally videotape the cameras, the payload bay cameras, and then they would downlink them overnight while the crew is asleep. So they did that. So we went in the next day and we were watching the deploy from the payload bay cameras. And when the separation happened, it was obvious that something dramatic had happened. And the separation band, it gets a little technical because the separation band that is, you're right, is solid until it has to separate completely, is a relatively thin aluminum band with a groove down the middle of it. And the intent is that it buckles and just breaks. And so you should have a nice smooth cut where the two separate.
I see.
And
this is what holds the spacecraft onto the flight support equipment?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
It holds the TOS to its cradle in the shuttle, and then the spacecraft, this ACT spacecraft, is bolted onto the TOS.
Okay.
So, and then I'm sorry again. This gets a little technical, but what happens is there's an oval stainless steel tube that is the circumference of that is the separation. It provides the separation, and what happens is you put an explosive into that oval tube, and when it explodes, it goes round. And when it goes round, it's sandwiched in two aluminum rings. Okay, if you can imagine, and those aluminum rings have the groove cut into it right where that oval will become a circle. So when that oval becomes a circle because of the explosive, they're called doublers. The aluminum doublers will flex a little bit and they'll snap. And that's what provides the separation.
Interesting.
So we saw the video of the next day, and when they separate, there's a ton of debris just flies everywhere, and we can see cords hanging out and just stuff like a very ugly separation. The crew, who had never seen a spacecraft separate, I'd never seen a spacecraft separate. We didn't know really what to expect, so saw all this debris and stuff coming out, but had no idea what was normal or expected, and so didn't think to call it down as abnormal. And so we were just learning about this watching the video replays. So let's see. So the technical details of what happened are that in that oval, that expanding tube, it's called an expanding tube separation system. So in that oval, you put an explosive cord, but in fact you put two explosive cords in there because you have a primary one and a backup one.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And what makes it a little bit complicated, terminology-wise, is that cord, the explosive cord, has two ends. Okay, and then so you have a primary end of the cord and a backup end of the cord. And the idea is you can fire either end of the cord and the cord will completely separate. But you, for reliability, you actually put a charge into both ends of the cords, right, so that they both both ignite. Right. And the way I described this failure, it was a devious terminology problem, because you have an A cord and a B cord, and you have a primary end of each cord and a backup end of each cord.
Wow.
And so when you're doing the wiring, and just looking at the wiring, you say A pry and A backup, and B pry and B backup. And when they made the harness years before, somebody made an assumption and they tied A pry and B pry, because that's what it looks like you should do, and A backup and B backup. It sounds like you have two ends of a pry cord and two ends of a backup cord, but you don't. Yeah. You have an A cord and it has two ends, and a B cord and it has two ends. Because on the switches that the astronauts throw, it's I believe it was, I was looking for the drawing, couldn't find the drawing, but I believe it was primary and secondary cords. We didn't call it A cord and B cord inside the cabin.
Adding to the terminology fun.
Right. So now you've got pry, you've got secondary, you've got backup. And so we, the people that made the toss, wired this thing wrong from the beginning. Some of the post-flight analysis says, well, they should have tested this thing end to end. Well, we did. I mean, we went in and we made sure that when the crew threw the switch that said pry, the lights came on that we expected, which would be A pry and B pry.
Yeah.
Right. Well, turns out we blew both cords at the same time, right? Because when we fired A pry and B pry, it was the pry ends of the two cords, and so we blew both cords at the same time, which is the absolute thing you are not allowed to do on one of these separation systems.
Yeah.
You may only blow one cord at a time. And so when we blew both cords, we didn't just circularize that tube. We blew that tube to smithereens.
Oh, wow.
So not only did those doublers that are supposed to bend and snap were shattered. We put, I'm going to say, hundreds of pieces of aluminum shrapnel in the payload bay. The debris punctured the lining of the payload bay in many places, but unbelievably, we missed hydraulic lines, we missed major cables, there was a ton of stuff that we missed.
Yeah, it's like APUs back there.
I'm sorry?
It's like APUs back there. APUs? I'm like running through my head.
Yeah, it's about 20 about this line of action is it's aft cargo bay. It would have been radial, so it wasn't going into the OMS engines, wasn't going to the SSMEs, but yes, hydraulic lines, oxygen lines. There are a million things that would have been really, really bad. So anyway, we're our eyeballs are watching this video, and we knew something bad had happened, but the shuttle systems all checked out, and really the only effect that it had on the flight was that there were now all these sharp edges that they didn't expect in the payload bay, and Jim Newman and Carl Waltz were going on EVA later in the flight, and they were going to go down the whole length of the payload bay testing out some station techniques and tools.
Right.
And they were restricted from going past the plane of that damage. So they can go through 70% of the payload bay, but not the aft end of the payload bay. So that was an operational effect. But when we got when the Discovery landed successfully and everything, and we went and retrieved our airborne support equipment, the cradle, it was shocking that we got away with such a contingency, such a poor outcome. And you look at it and you think, it was just diabolical. The nomenclature of the different parts that had to get put together was just so diabolical that nobody caught it. And so, all the lessons learned briefings that I'd seen talk about, you can't just go, you can't do end-to-end functioning just by what the drawing says the function is. You got to look at the hardware and figure out, make sure that your end-to-end function is the way you intend on the hardware. But of course, it's easy to say, and it's easy to look back and say coulda, shoulda, woulda. But it was pretty dramatic, and I've heard it called the most significant close call on the shuttle program. I don't know who puts that list together, but we certainly, it's a lesson I carry with me every day about making sure the design meets the hardware, and then the operations.
So did they the terminology problem, it makes complete sense, and it just shows how important it is to really kind of, why, people joke about it, but they say that naming things is the hardest thing in programming. And I think in engineering in general, it's super important, because you need to have that context and understanding I'm curious, did they ever like just bring this thing out, to some range and actually fire it as it would be fired in the orbiter and see what would happen, or was that not feasible?
No, we tested it. No, we did not. But we tested it like we would test everything else. And so we had what's called a breakout box. And so we took the harness and threw it in a breakout box, and then we wired up the breakout box to show what signals and power is being sent through. And so when the checkout procedure said, okay, astronaut simulator, go to pry arm fire, and then on the breakout box, pry A and pry B lit up, and they go, great. Right. So the effort was completely made to say, we're going to do an end-to-end test. We're going to make sure this thing is built to print. Yeah. And then the error was way back when the harness was designed, and it was the intent wasn't caught. And, part of this is the separation system. It's called a super zip. Is made. I can't remember even who super zip. Yeah, and I can't remember who makes it, but it's a part that you buy, and it has its own nomenclature. They don't think that their nomenclature has any particular ambiguity. They have an A chord and a B chord and a primary end and a backup end, and so just alone that part doesn't have much ambiguity. But then you put it in a system that has switches in the cockpit that say primary and secondary. It was really an unfortunate crash of terminology that sounds really similar, and you think you know what's going on, and I don't know. It was unfortunate. So we got away with one there.
Yeah, it also kind of shows, I guess, why it's so important to focus so much on interfaces with all these systems. Because I'm thinking,
interfaces, right?
Like, you've got a company that's making the Super Zip, which is going to Martin, which is building the thing and operated by Orbital Sciences, interfacing with whoever made the flights, the Cradle, interfacing with Rockwell, making the orbiter, operated by astronauts trained down in Houston.
That's exactly right. No, so. Every time I watch a Saturn V launch, film of a Saturn V launch, I've never gotten to see one in person. I am so impressed that thing works because, first stage was built by Boeing in Huntington, I guess, and the second stage was made by Martin and whoever. Anyway, all three stages were made by completely independent different contractors. And this is pre-fax machine, right? This was if you had a drawing change to your interface. You had to wrap it, duplicate it, wrap it up, fly it out to the West Coast, and then they had to unwrap it and understand the change of the interface, the complexity, and I think the same thing with the ISS, with parts made from completely different nations, and however, at least in most of the ISS was designed in the electric data age where drawings could at least be digitized or scanned and sent quickly. But interfaces will kill you. They will absolutely kill you. And you have to really, as a designer, an engineer, your attention, you've got to be highly tuned once you have an interface, especially from different companies or different pieces, and you got to completely understand what the interface control drawing is telling you on both sides, and how to integrate it.
I think that also kind of highlights maybe why SpaceX goes through kind of a weird amount of effort to build stuff in-house. People have commented on, and I think part of what they're going for is they are always looking for ways to make things cheaper. But I also think I'd imagine that a big part is just like, hey, like, we made this, we got the metal, we built this, and we know what this is, we know the software, all this stuff.
I think that is exactly right. And so not only did they build it, but the guy in the next, or the team on the next cubicle designed it. So if you have any question, you go to them. You go, did you mean this? And they can tell you, oh yeah, that's exactly what we did or we didn't do. So I don't fault them at all for that. There's benefit for having diversity in your design in terms of
sure,
parts and stuff, but there is hidden complexity in there, and that's exactly a great point. Is that having the people that build all the different parts all under one roof and that can talk together, have lunch together, is one way to help avoid these interface mix-ups.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of the trade-off. I'm just thinking that through. Like, like you said, like you can end up with a simpler design with fewer interfaces, but you're going to have more commonality so that, if there's a problem with the tank, okay, well, now there's a problem with every tank in your entire system. Whereas,
right.
You get that diversity and kind of, different engineering approaches and maybe a different, unlikely to have common failure modes, but then you have to grapple with the additional, you better get your interfaces right. That's interesting.
Right. And honestly, in the early days of SpaceX, I was looking at them aghast. They're building their own flight computers. Who builds their own flight computers, their own batteries, their own actuators? They think that, we have specialists that, Eagle Pitcher they've been making space batteries for, dozens and dozens of years. And why should they be making their own batteries? Well, it turns out it worked out for SpaceX, and one of the big advantages for them, having everything in house is not only control of the supply chain, but also, that battery was designed for that spacecraft.
Right.
The match is going to be perfect.
So actually, not to go on too much of a SpaceX tangent, but I'm curious, have you been following the Starship development at all?
I'm sorry, I have not. So I don't know much.
Well, I'll just briefly say this, and if you don't know anything about it, that's fine. But like what they've been doing has been kind of controversial, which is they're building their next generation launch vehicle, and they've essentially just, I think you could characterize what they're doing as just going for it. They basically just started building extremely rough prototypes out in like the middle of nowhere and just trying it, and they blow up a lot. Like not on purpose. Sometimes on purpose, often not on purpose. And again, I think the word to use is aghast. People are like, you don't build rockets in fields, and they just kind of shrug and keep going. And I think the argument is that you have to do all the real work and do all the verification and make sure everything's right. But also I think they're like, you'll never learn more than just trying it and seeing if it fails in the way that you expect.
You don't know where the boundary of the design is until you test both sides of the boundary. And so that's if they or anybody has the resources to do that, that's fantastic. Now you can understand the real limits of your design. And so, I spent a lot of time not criticizing SpaceX, but being skeptical of them. And at every turn, I've been proven wrong. So now I no longer, I listen to the stories, and I'm no longer skeptical. I'll wait to see if these things happen, and I'll be darned if more often than not. The guy made a first stage fly back and land on a dime. It's unbelievable.
Have you seen it in person?
I've not seen it in person. No.
You got to make an attempt to get down there. I was there for the Falcon Heavy maiden launch.
Oh yeah, right. The 3 return, 2 out of 3, right?
Yeah, and so I was very lucky. A guy used to be on my team. He transferred down to Kennedy and got us, a place to sit in a field right outside the VAB.
Yeah. Wow.
And
that's
just
fantastic.
seeing that thing just going, I'm like, is it ever going to pitch? It's like right over us. And then, seeing, you just see them coming back like, oh my God, those buildings are flying at us.
Yeah. It's quite spectacular. And what an accomplishment. And, 10 years ago, I would have bet a paycheck that was not possible. I didn't think the physics was possible. I didn't think that you can get something going Mach 4 or 5 at that point, turned around and give it enough energy to slow it down and everything. Anyway, I'm impressed, and I'm not a, I still think that there are other innovative space companies that are in the marketplace, and that's good. But I've stopped being 100% skeptical about what SpaceX is doing because it hasn't paid off for me yet.
Right. So I guess speaking of current launch providers, do I understand correctly that you're working with Orbital now, or whoever they are now, or? So
I was with Orbital Sciences from almost the very beginning of their existence. And then I got a government job down in Houston, so I went down to Houston and trained to fly in space for 16 years. And then after retiring from NASA, I went back to Orbital, which then became Orbital ATK because they merged. I did that for, I think, 3 years, and then I took a quick break and I went to Japan to be a teacher because
Nice.
I thought it would be fun to share my experiences and pass it on to the next generation. And so then, when returning from Japan, I decided to change industries for the first time in my career. I guess besides teaching. So now I work for a nonprofit. But
Nice.
but I still have friends at what's now Northrop Grumman. I guess merged. They merged with Northrop Grumman and assumed the Northrop Grumman name, and so they're now Northrop Grumman. I don't know, Space Division or something, and so I still have friends there and still talk to them and still follow them, of course, and I don't know. So I try to keep my connection there, but not I'm not employed by them.
I gotcha. Yeah, part of why I ask is just because what's especially fun about them for me is that Antares launch is like right in our backyard.
Yeah.
Like I've gone
Tomorrow
to. I
night.
think, is there one tomorrow night?
Yeah, tomorrow evening, 8:30, I think, is launch time, and I'm trying to figure out what field I can stand in here in Fairfax County to get a line of sight out to Wallops. And yeah, it's fantastic. So when I came back to Orbital after my astronaut career, I got to work on the Cygnus program, and so
Nice.
that's the cargo delivery vehicle to the space station, and that's the vehicle is launching tomorrow and launches on the Antares, which is the Orbital built and designed launch vehicle. So it's I've got friends up and down that product, so it's a lot of fun.
What I especially like about Antares, I mean, other than outside of the engineering and just making it work, is you can get, because it's at Wallops, you can get arguably too close to the launches. There's a pier that's about 2 miles away. And it's like I just like set up shop. I was like, oh, this is a thing.
Have you been out for a launch? I've never seen a launch Oh no, yeah, I saw a Minuteman, but I never saw an Antares launch out there. I was always working console here at the home base in Dulles.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would definitely recommend it because it's not too long of a drive, and it's crazy to just kind of come right back home and like, all right, well, no planes involved.
Yeah. Were you at the mishap that they had right off the launch pad that we had right off the launch pad?
No. I was still working in New York City at that time, so I was watching it live on the internet, just like, oh boy, that's a rough day for everyone.
I heard it was clear that you could almost be too close to that. The people that were there, it was a very dynamic event for them. So safely, fortunately, nobody was injured, but I understand the volume was very high.
So if you're on board, I got a couple of just kind of like random grab bag questions for you.
No problem at all. So
this will give you an idea. Like, so you mentioned like apologizing for getting down in the weeds, which is kind of like all I do in the podcast is like.
Well, that's what I like about your podcast is you do get down in the weeds, and so it's really fascinating for me, but it's hard for me to share it with anybody like my wife or anybody who isn't that quite as interested in the weeds as I am and you are.
And it used to be easier because I tell people like, oh, I introduce you to it. You could just start at the beginning, but now it's like, oh, there's quite a few episodes. Maybe that's easy for me to say now. So to give you an idea of something that's this far down the weeds, when you take the van out to the shuttle pad,
right,
you get out of the van, literally what's the next step? Because is it just like you get into an elevator right at ground level and go all the way up to that catwalk? I think the Apollo guys would go up onto the launch platform and walk across to a second elevator, or, how did you get from van to shuttle?
Sure. So the van drives up the ramp, drops us off onto the launch platform, right? You're on a launch platform. And what's cool is that every other time you've done that, you've had to do a badge exchange at the fence, and there's workers everywhere. But this time there's a driver. There's 7 strap-in personnel up in the white room, and then or in the vehicle. and then the seven of you, assuming there's seven. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, you get out, and then there's one of the strap-in personnel is down there waiting for you. We like to get out there 5 minutes early, and then we can walk around the vehicle and look up and gawk. And the 120 crew that I was on, we did a huddle in sort of a teamwork huddle there, and
Nice.
it's just an awesome moment. And then you're right. I mean, you just get onto the elevator. You're holding your little air conditioner. Basically, it's air. It's fan that's just blowing air through your suit, just keeping you cool. And so you. We have one of the strap-in guys is helping us with our helmets. So you're holding your helmet in a bag, and you're holding your cooling unit in the other hand. And the seven of you plus the ones, the eight of you get in the elevator, and you hit the 195 level. 195 level is the where the white room is for the shuttle. And so you get out of the elevator, and you're right on the 195 level. They'll take all your helmets and have them ready for you inside the vehicle for strap-in. And so it's literally get out of the car, look around, get in the elevator, quick ride up to 195, out. And then the strap-in sequence is CDR first, upstairs, and MS closest to the wall. I can't remember what number it is, 1, 2, 3. I think that's where MS3 is the seat position. Anyway, closest to the farthest away from the hatch downstairs, and they strap those in first, and then pilot, and then the MS in the middle seat downstairs, and then MS1, then MS2. And so on my first flight, I was MS2, so I was last to be strapped in, which is great because then I had 30 minutes to hang out on the launch gantry and look around and feel the breeze and think about what good fortune has brought me to that point in my career. And then I also get to use the bathroom. So because there's the last bathroom on Earth is up there. And so that's it. That's sort of a tradition. So you got to do that and then get strapped in.
So I guess since you're talking about getting strapped in, like something that's always kind of surprised me is, and I think it's easy for me to be surprised just reading it in a book, is how uncomfortable is it sitting on your back like that? Because they always make a pretty big deal out of it. So I guess I'm curious, like, is it as bad as has been described? And is there a good way I could replicate this at home? Do I have to like lay on my back like on a backpack or something?
Yeah, probably fill a backpack with like cans of soda and like a rolled up newspaper, and because you are we are in a harness so we've got a parachute and an entire survival kit, including a raft and everything, sort of in our backpack, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have to bail out of that thing, you have to carry, you're going to be jumping out of the shuttle with, a parachute, oxygen bottle, raft, and all your survival kit. So all that stuff is that you're lying on, and they try to make it comfortable for you, and they try to put a thin pad there. Is it uncomfortable? Yes, it's uncomfortable because you can feel, primarily it's the oxygen bottle that's sort of digging into you. You're got the privilege of being in the shuttle, and it's just incredibly cool. The part of the discomfort is you're there for maybe 2 or 3 hours, and so every little poke at you starts to get aggravated. But you know what? You're there with your best friends and you're joking around, and it's the time waiting for launch is it's a fun time because you're all geared up and you're excited, and so it's it's uncomfortable. But you know what? I'll do it again. I'd be happy to do it again.
But by any chance, did you listen to the episode I did on STS-51I where they unstrapped?
So. Is that? Yeah, I believe I did. And they unstrapped because they thought they were going to scrub.
Yeah.
And the rumor is, or you said that there's some recorded history that they were walking around. Somebody was on the flight deck. Some mid-deck guy was on the flight deck and just
I
chatting
think
or
it's the
something.
other way.
Some flight deck guy was on the mid-deck chatting around, and yeah. So there's a right. That's right. There's I did hear that, and I was unaware of that. I had heard a story. I don't know what flight, but I had heard a story of. I was telling another astronaut, another former, about that incident, and he was relaying that on his flight, there was another crew member. I won't name anybody, but was decided that they wanted to film entry, and so was a downstairs crew member, but was upstairs on the flight deck during re-entry, and he might have been up on the flight deck, standing there at touchdown, or close to it. So
might be maybe this guy over here.
Maybe I can't. If he's EVA, that might be the guy.
Yeah. All right. So actually, this is perfect. So leading into EVA, this again, weird specific questions. Could you tell me what the texture of the launch and escape suit is like, and is it any different with the EMU? Just like, does it look like canvas, or like, you see it a lot, but you never have a chance to touch that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the launch and entry suit, the outside of it is fabric, so it feels like canvas. It feels like a tent, but it's a little softer than a tent would. So it's pleasant to the feel on the outside. Of course, with the rings and everything, there are hard things that you bump into that can hurt a little bit.
Right.
But the outside of that is, I would say, it feels like canvas. The EMU, the outside of it is all beta cloth. Beta cloth is, I'm told, it's woven fiberglass. So it's very slippery. It's really slippery, and so when you touch it, it has it's slippery in a very distinct way. And I'm trying to think of something that is equivalent. I can't. It's like a nylon fabric, like a windbreaker, but even slipperier than that.
Wow!
As if it's Teflon-y. So yeah, the feel of the outside of the EMU is it is a very particular feel called, and it's beta cloth.
Wow, I never realized
and
that.
It's really tough. It's really tough, of course. I mean, that's why they use it. But not unpleasant to rub up against and to feel.
That's fascinating. I would never have guessed it was slippery.
Yeah, I guess the best, sometimes old gloves get moved around as exhibit items, and kids can try on an old glove. Yeah. And if it's a real glove, if it's an actual glove that was made but it's been long decommissioned, that you can get that feel and feel what that beta cloth feels like.
Actually, that's another perfect segue, because my next question was going to be, I saw an article, so I know you've done some EVAs, so I'm wondering if you could shed some light on, I saw that apparently it's very common for people to damage or lose their fingernails after an EVA. Can you explain what's up with that?
Oh, yeah. No, I've yeah. So, we call them space walks, but you're not using your feet or your legs. Sometimes you'll clip your boots into something to stabilize yourself, but this is a spacewalk is a hand intensive activity. And so your hands are the gloves are custom fit to you. There were at the time 25 or so custom shapes based on real astronaut hands. And the first thing they do when you get there is they try to figure out which of those your hand will fit into. And if you're lucky, you have a weird shaped hand and they have to make a custom glove for you. So a glove is named, your glove, or the Tani glove. But there is no Tani glove because I fit into two or three different other gloves. So they can adjust the size. So they custom fit you into a glove, and the glove fitting can be 4, 5, 6 different sessions. You go in and you
Wow.
try it on, and then you want the right amount of fit, right? So you don't want your finger jammed into the fingertip, but
Yeah.
you don't want it not in the fingertip. And then it's different when you're inflated and everything. And so there's a lot of attention because you're using your hands all the time. And so
Yeah.
the glove wants to be like this, in
Yeah.
neutral position. And anything else you do, if you want to widen your hand or narrow your hand, it takes force. Just
Oh,
hurts.
the position is like I thought it was more like splayed all the way open, like a. I was
No,
imagining
no,
like
there's a natural position. It's sort of, holding a bowling ball kind of shape. But,
Okay.
if you want to do anything, you want to hold on to anything or open up your hand, it just takes force. And so your fingernails just take a beating because they are being pressed against the inside of that glove, and there's force on them. It feels like all the time. When you can clip on to structure and you have 10 minutes or 5 minutes of nothing to do on the timeline, it's just so relaxing, so nice to relieve your fingers of the pressure of holding on.
Wow.
And so we practice in the pool. We generally do 5 or so practices in the pool for every EVA we do out in space. And you get in that thing and you're working your hands for 6 or 7 hours in the pool. And if you have an EVA heavy flight, you're in that pool maybe once a week, maybe twice a week sometimes. And yeah, I used to have bruises up and down my fingernails, and you try to clip them tight and everything, but you could see bruises up and down your fingernails and where they separate out, and you really have to be careful of them. And then in space, the same thing can happen, especially if you're doing a couple EVAs in a week, and even there a little more so. You're, of course, if you let go in the pool, that's a bad thing because you shouldn't let go. But if you let go in space, it's worse. So the pucker level is a little higher in space, and so I think you work a little bit harder, and so your fingernails take a beating, and that's absolutely true.
And I'd imagine also that like when you're out there, you got like kind of adrenaline going, and so it's not until you come back inside that you really feel like, oh no.
Exactly right. And you work through it. If your fingernails hurt, well, hey, I'm EVA here. That's a minor issue, and I'm not going to complain about it. But then you get in, then you can complain about it.
It's just another kind of really specific one. So you spent a fair amount of time on ISS, which had constant machinery and circulation fans and everything. So I'm curious, what was it like the first time you got to sit in a quiet room after getting back? Was it weird? Did you even notice?
I don't remember that. That's an interesting point. I will say though that the U.S. segment is much quieter than the Russian segment. Segment, but I lived I lived in the Cayuta back in the service module, so I kind of got used to the noisier environment back in the Russian segment. But when you go through PMA-1 and now you're in the lab or the node or the lab, the U.S. segment is significantly much more quiet, significantly more quiet. You would notice that. You would definitely notice that. But I didn't notice. That became the normal background noise for me. So I don't remember the quiet, the dead quiet when I came back. Now, when I came back from my long duration, 4 months in space, I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, so there was never any quiet. But but anyway, I don't remember that moment. That's a good question that nobody's brought that up. So,
astronauts have to work out for like hours a day. So I'm curious how, what your relationship was. Were you, was just the kind of thing where like, you're a fit enough guy that's just like, normal to you? Was it something that would like, you would know that you just had to get over with and you would kind of dread, or like, is it just something you didn't really think about and you just did it because you have to do it?
So, it's my guess that 80% of astronauts are gym rats, love to work out. I'm not one of those guys.
Oh no.
And so I'm not. But of course, it's part of my job and it's my responsibility to be in shape. But you're right. We have 2 hours of exercise scheduled a day, and it's good because it's tracked. It's tracked. I have to log my reps. I have to log my, how much time I was doing it, because this is all data that they want to know based on, so that was good for me. That was motivating enough for me to, of course, do everything that was asked of me. But I was in space with Peggy Whitson, and Peggy she's a goddess. I mean, not only is she the hardest working astronaut I know, but she works out. So I would get up early and I'd go down and get something out of the lab, and there she's working out already. So she likes to work out before the morning DPC, the morning meeting. And then fortunately, there were only 3 of us on orbit because she was on the exercise equipment, a lot. And so, but we never had a schedule clash. But with 6 on board or 7 coming up, that we're going to have to think about, be more conscientious. They have to be more conscientious of scheduling. But so, there are things I really liked about exercising. I liked the workout. I liked getting the blood moving around. I liked the force on my body. I liked doing it's called weight training, although it's just pushing against force. And because it just felt good to get, pressure on your bones, and felt good to get the blood moving. But I can't imagine that I did more than was asked of me. I would do my 2 hours. But unlike Peggy, I wasn't waking up on Saturday so I can get an extra run in. The treadmill was for me painful. I did not enjoy the treadmill at all. You're wearing a harness because you have to be pulled down onto it, and you have to be pulled down onto it about the weight that with the number of pounds that you weigh. Yeah, and through these bungees, so now you're pressed onto this thing. And then you have to put on shoes, which you don't normally do. So the only time I wore shoes on my 4 months was to put running shoes on to run. And so you tighten up the running shoes. Now your feet hurt. And it's a very technique specific device. And so, I'd get a couple miles in, and I would mix that in. The bike is easier just because it's just easier on your, you're not, the forces on your body aren't as great. But then I got back, and then Sunny Williams decided she'd run the Boston Marathon on the thing. And I thought, oh man, for me to do 20 minutes on it was I didn't, that was an endurance for me. And then there's Sunny doing the Boston Marathon on it. So hats off to her.
Pretty intense.
Yeah.
All right, so I got a couple of little ones here, and again, please cut me off if you gotta go.
No, these are enjoyable. I love talking about it.
So this one, I'm gonna send you a link in the little chat here, and actually, I got it from one of your flights. What is up with these little timers I see stuck everywhere?
Everywhere, yeah. What's funny? I'm just looking at the picture now. What's funny is it's the thing you use a dozen times a day on a flight day, in the shuttle at least, and it's the one thing they don't give you training on, and it's got too many buttons, and so they go, "Give me a minute 30 timer," and I'm like, "Hold on, hold on," and no, because in the shuttle, and less so in the station, but in the shuttle, there are a lot of procedures that are time dependent. So when you're opening the payload bay doors, you throw the switch, you start a timer, and then you expect the payload bay doors to open in 2 minutes and 40, whatever. And so we use them all the time. And so, or even during ascent, you put the timer, you'll set the timer for TAL, right? And so you as an MS, you want to be ahead of, you want to be helping the crew. So you go, okay.
And you were a flight engineer, right?
Yeah, I was an MS2. Right. So you set timers as a heads up. You set timers because the procedure calls on it. And we have them everywhere. And the big advice is that the wise old astronauts give you, and then you learn. You make your mistake, and then you learn that that's what you should do. Is you put a little dot on the timer, a little paper dot, one of those sticker dots, and you write on the dot what that timer is. This timer is, because you set a 27-minute timer, and beep, beep, beep. You can go, I don't know. I don't know what that was.
Something's happening.
Timer? Right. Something. We need to be aware of something. I don't know what it is. And so, you're always peeling the dot off and putting a new dot and writing the new thing. And I would say on Shuttle, you saw them everywhere. On station, we must have had some of them, but either the timer isn't as critical. The times when you're doing it, we run our procedures we used to in the old days when I was there on a laptop, and you have a clock in the laptop. So when you run the procedure, you have a clock right there in front end. You can sometimes the procedure will ask you to write down the time and then write down the time again, so that the time is built into the procedure. But anyway, those are they were everywhere. We probably had a half a dozen, maybe a dozen in the shuttle, and I might have one in my stuff my memories from spaceflight box. So because you use them so much, and especially in Shuttle.
Yeah, that's cool. So also on Shuttle, have you tried that Shuttle simulator at Kennedy Visitor Complex?
No. Let's see. What Shuttle simulator? Oh, the launch. Oh, yes, I have. The launch experience?
Yeah, ride. And I'm curious, obviously nothing's going to compare, but I'm curious, is it anywhere close to, is it even in the right direction for people who can't experience it on their own? Does it give you a decent idea of what you would feel?
I mean, it does. We were spoiled because we got to train in what's called the motion-based simulator, which is a really dynamic simulator. When the commander moves the stick, you're moving forward, and for launch we go a full 90 degrees pitch up, so you are fully on your back. I think the one in KSC probably only goes about 30 degrees. You feel like you're plastered into your seat. Yeah, but I suspect you're only about 30 degrees up. But the motion-based simulator does a full rotation to 90, and so. But it's exciting, and your brain is fooled by the visuals, and so it's fun to watch the visuals, and I've gotten to ride it a few times with tour groups, and it's fun just to watch everybody experience the ride, because it's close. It certainly is close, and it's fun to shake around, and it's hard to get Miko right, of course, because the instant loss of force. But I don't know. It's certainly I would certainly happy to do it again.
I think one big tell of how it can be a far cry from the real thing. It's just an hour to the west, because so they have that ride out at Disney with the centrifuge. And every single time you get on it, I get on it and they spin you up to 2G for 10 seconds. And even having done it, even knowing what to expect, even knowing what's physically happening, and having done it before, every time it ramps up to even just 2G for a few seconds, I go, I've made a mistake. I shouldn't be on this. And I just think man, is 3G for 8 minutes.
I've not done that. Is that the Flight to Mars one?
Yeah, Mission Space.
Mission Space. Is that the one that apparently people throw up on?
Yeah, so what I tell people, and this is funny, because so what it in fact is the giant centrifuge, because that's how it's got to be, obviously.
Okay.
But so they hide that fact. You don't tell that you're spinning. So I tell people who are going down to Disney, I'm like, you should absolutely ride this ride, but you got to look forward and don't move your head. Don't turn your head.
Right. Exactly.
You're going to get different signals. And I tell them, listen, since I'm telling you not to do it, you're going to want to do it.
Yeah, right.
Trust me, because what'll happen is not only do you get sick, but you end up throwing up sideways.
Oh,
and it happens. So ride with people you trust.
Right. Yeah. Right. With a barrier, with partitions around you. Yeah.
It's something else.
I've heard it's a great ride. I just don't want anybody throwing up on it.
Yeah. Like I said, ride with people you trust. So 2 last ones here. I guess,
sure.
Most of being an astronaut is you're not flying, and it's kind of day to day is really like that. So I'm curious, how how much was the actual job? How much did it compare to what you expected? I think a lot of people don't have that visibility into like what the day-to-day life is really like. So, was it basically what you expected? Were you surprised by any aspects of it?
Let's see. By the time, so I in my previous job, I get to work with astronauts and I get to hang out in Building 4, which is where their offices were, and so I had a pretty decent snapshot of what life as an astronaut was like. And I would go to we were the payload, and the crew would show up, so I'd see him go to meetings and do all this sort of mundane stuff. And I guess my take is that it's as fun as people think it is. I mean, we get to do really cool stuff, right? Yeah. We get to fly in T-38s, and we get to dive in the big pool, and we get to, so it is as fun as you think it is. It's probably not as glamorous as you think it is.
Yeah.
You get accepted to the astronaut program. You're a big hot shot. You go down to NASA, and they give you a parking space, and the parking space is about a quarter mile from from your door, right? And you think, well, I got an assigned parking space, but it's I'm not being treated like a king here.
Yeah, I try to remind people, it's a job. They're people.
It is, yeah. It's a job, and honestly, it's a great job, and so but the day-to-day stuff is there's a lot more for people who don't know anything about being an astronaut. It's you go to meetings, and you go to staff meetings, and you fill out expense reports, and you do the mundane stuff that most jobs, especially technical jobs, involve. Your job there at NASA is to prepare yourself for space flight. So it's studying a lot, and it's practicing a lot. It for me, it met my expectations. I knew the cool stuff we get to do. I knew the mundane stuff that we have to do. You're a government employee. That was the first time I had been a government employee, so that was a change. I had to learn how to be a government employee, and there's a lot of regulation and expectations there.
Yeah.
But you learn the camaraderie down there is fantastic. You've got you're in a community of handpicked people, and you're handpicked because you get along well and you're fun to be around, and so now you're around 50 other people that are fun to be around, and
right.
It's a lot. There's some great camaraderie, but as a job, it is a job, and it's just that you do get to do some really fun, cool stuff.
So you actually mentioned how it's different being a government employee, and a friend passed along a question saying, you've worked both as an astronaut and in private space industry, so you have like this kind of perspective from both sides. Do you think, like, what, in your opinion, if anything, would have to change on like the government side to make it easier for like more people to be able to fly? It seems like one thing that's kind of eye-opening to me learning about Shuttle was it was fairly recently that even companies could just go and like launch something. That wasn't really a thing until the 80s.
Right.
It was like very ad hoc and had to kind of work it out. And we're kind of barely scraping into people being able to do it. So like, what do you think would need to change to clear the road for that?
Well, you're right. Commercial space. I was I worked in my old company. I worked on the Pegasus program, that air-launched rocket.
Oh, yeah.
And the question was, who regulates those launches? Who's responsible? What government agency is responsible for that? And if we go to the middle of the Pacific Ocean and launch, which we can do, who's responsible for that? So there was a bunch of regulation that had to be straightened out about who's responsible, and Department of Transportation or FAA or all these agencies. And so I think seems like that's been at least there's a process. It seems like what needs to happen. Well, so the first of all, the mindset, and I think it really has changed. The mindset that governments do the important space work, and I think the great thing about Crew Dragon is that now a private contractor, for a for-profit contractor, has shown that they can fly astronauts at least to low Earth orbit.
Yeah.
So that mindset is changing, and it had now many other companies can think about that and think about ways to do it more cost efficiently, and so that will help. Initially, working for the government, one of the things that I found inhibiting, especially in spaceflight, was many more layers of bureaucracy, and so and also more compartments to have to check. So if you wanted to do something interesting, I don't know, fly a particular experiment or whatever, the hoops that you had to go through, the number of layers of management you had to check with, and then the number of departments that you had to go check with, felt like it was a little ridiculous. Now you can justify all those, right? You can justify it with safety and needing to understand the full, so that everybody understands what you're doing. But you can imagine at a smaller company where that you're taking the initiative to do something, everybody's happy that you're doing it, and it's the bureaucracy is less. I don't know. I don't want to badmouth the bureaucracy.
No, yeah, I understand.
But there's probably a balance. And that was my feeling about that was eye-opening to me when I joined the government, is the number of committees and the number of panels and the number of review boards and the number of all this stuff that I wasn't aware of from coming from commercial.
Yeah. All right. That makes a ton of sense. Let's see. I think I got this one. It might be impossible to answer, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Okay.
So again, it might be a lot easier for me to ask, not knowing what it's like on the inside, is why do people leave? Like, I imagine it's going to be different for everyone, but like every time I'm reading about someone, I see they flew twice. It's like, you flew twice and you left this? Right. Like, what are you doing?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question, because I still call it the best job in the world. It is. I think it is the best job in the world. And so how come I'm not doing it? How come I gave it up? So I can let me speak personally. I'll tell you why I gave it up. So I applied and got selected to be an astronaut when I was single. Then I got married as an astronaut, and then flew my first flight before children, and then I flew my second flight with two toddlers. And I got back and that was a long duration flight. So I got a short shuttle flight and a long space station stay. And I got back, and the experience for families and the people that are on the ground is much harder than for us in space, emotionally. And also logistically, it's much more difficult. So when we go to space station, in my time frame, when we trained for space station, it was about a 3.5 year training flow, and about half that time was spent out of the house, meaning Russia or Germany or Canada or Tokyo or something. Yeah. And so tons of travel, tons of time away from family. And so, I had a young family, and I felt like, and I had the privilege of doing incredible things. And did I want to go up again? Sure. Was I willing to spend another 3 years being a transient in my family for another opportunity? Yeah. In my mind, that wasn't the good trade. Right. And so, plus, everybody wants to fly, and in the station era, we're flying, what is it, 5 or 6 astronauts a year. Yeah. As opposed to shuttle era, when we were flying 35 or 40 astronauts a year. Yeah. And so, there's a line behind you, and you want to see those guys, those men and women, get their flights. Yeah. And so, I guess I felt like the trade was the marginal benefit for going through another launch camp, another training flow, was not big enough for the pain that, and missing watching my kids grow up, that I would miss out on. And I was young enough where I thought, well, I could start career 3.0 and find something else to do. So I am jealous every time I see my buddies get up there and floating around, and I wish I could go back up. I wish I could have an hour sitting in the cupola and watching the Earth roll by. But we leave for various reasons, and for me, it was I just didn't want to miss spend as much time away from home, and get to watch my kids grow up, and not put them through the terror of going to space and living in space for months at a time.
I think that makes a ton of sense. So last question will be a really easy one here, which is, do you listen to any other podcasts?
Well, I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Got any recommendations for us?
Yes, I do. I feel like they're all well-worn, but 99% Invisible is a favorite. Freakonomics is a favorite. The Anthropocene Reviewed is a great one. I don't know how popular that is.
I don't think I know that one.
John Green. The Anthropocene Reviewed. He takes human experience and he rates them on a 5-point scale. So like an Amazon review for like meningitis or for Diet Dr. Pepper.
Right.
So it's really interesting. He's an incredible writer, and his essays are riveting, I think. So my only complaint is he rates things on a 5-point scale, which is not proper. You should not rate on a 5-point scale.
Why is that?
You should rate on a 4-point scale. 5-point scale gives you the option to pick a 3. You don't want, if you want a rating, don't give anybody the middle choice. Make them choose. Make them get off the fence. That's Dan Tani's advice. But I'm the space above us is great. I've been really enjoying listening to him, hearing stories of people I know and stories that I didn't. I thought the Gemini and Apollo stuff was fantastic. So good job there.
Well, thank you. As you imagine, that means a lot coming from someone who's been there. So
well,
I appreciate it.
I'm a fan like you are of that era.
Yeah.
And so I thought the Skylab. Nobody talks about Skylab, and so I thought the way you covered Skylab was great. I thought it was really, really interesting.
The secret crown jewel. It was so much fun to get into it. Like I think I called it the anti-Apollo. Like no one's heard of it, but it's so important.
Right. And the cool thing is you can walk around the the development unit, the EDU, at the Smithsonian.
Yeah.
And you can. I have not been back there since I listened to your podcast about the Space Lab, or Skylab. But I want to do that. I want to listen to it again and then walk around because there's so much more to learn about it than just walking through it cold. All
right, awesome. Well, it's been really great and truly a privilege to be able to talk to you today. Hopefully I can cook up some more questions. Especially I'll be having some questions once the podcast timeline gets to 1996, so you can count on that.
Yeah, right. I'm looking forward to hearing the Sardines make their appearance. And cool. Okay, well, it's been a pleasure. Let's do it anytime.
All right.
I'm happy to contribute any way I can.
Thanks again. Talk to you soon.
All right.
And there you have it. I've never done an interview before, but I had an absolute blast with this one. I'm looking forward to peppering Dan with some more questions when the astronaut class of 1996, the Sardines, join the story. I want to extend a sincere thank you to Dan Tani for listening to the show in the first place, and then for giving me a decent chunk of his time in order to answer my grab bag of questions. Next time, let's hear about the rest of STS-51. And we'll finally learn about the mission that I kept accidentally getting in my search results when reading about STS-51A, STS-51B, STS-51C. Next time, it's STS-51 nothing. Ad Astra, catch you on the next pass.